from Rav Sharki because he always has good ideas. A Tale of Two Rabbis. Rav Avi is controversial, right? He has his opinions, extremely opinionated, and he takes, for example, he's against going to the Temple Mount. Okay, but he's had his disputes with others. Why am I still? I guess I'm not denouncing him like others. And by the way, and he's not denouncing me. So why is that the case? Because I grew up with his farm. Okay, so I can't repudiate or take a different derech entirely and say, you know what, I don't believe anything he said before. Okay, I knew about the Shelat Shlomo when I went through it. You know, the set beforehand. You know, I'm talking about his farm and Am Kalavi and Tal Hermon. I saw these when I was 19, so I can't undo what I've seen in my youth, right? And Rav Sharki, who basically comes from the same base medrash, literally from the same base medrash. When we say it figuratively, it means that the same school of thought. And even that school of thought is itself a figurative expression. But they actually are Talmidim of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook. They're Merkazniks, except Rav Avi is older. And Rav Sharki is from, like I said, from that group, but he's a lot different in his viewpoints and his halachic considerations. Okay, very different. And they've even had their own arguments, friendly, of course, but they're arguments. So I'm now trying to catch up on everything I missed from Rav Sharki. Okay, I find that his message is I'm much more in tune with that. And he was actually here last week. Were you there? You saw that announcement? He was here on Motzei Shabbos. He started his speech at like 10 o'clock at night, well past my bedtime, and he continued even later past my bedtime. But they recorded it so you could go hear the shir. Thank God. But I didn't get to see him. So Rav Sharki said that this is an interesting idea. He's talking about Sefer Yeshua. He said that when you have a new regime, okay, biblically wise, this is an idea. The new regime takes over the previous regime's female line. Now, the Malchus goes through the male line. Okay, Hu v'nav b'kerev Yisrael som tasim alecha ish, som tasim alecha melech. It has to be a melech v'lo malka. That's what Chazal say. Rav Sharki says that you see this idea. Let's see. Give an example. Rahav, the Zonah, represented the upper class of the Canaanites, and the first official act of conquest that the Israelites had in the land of Israel was in her city. Yoshua is basically the Jewish king. And what does he end up doing? According to Chazal, he ends up marrying her. She converts to Judaism ultimately, and he marries her. Okay, so this is the Jewish king takes in marriage the woman who most represents, the surviving woman, represents the previous regime. This as even more of a, I guess, pronounced example with regards to Shlomo Melech. There's a lot to do. Look back in the first book of Kings. You see that Shlomo Melech only began building the temple in his 4th year. According to our tradition, he became king on Shavuos. So his first year was short. It was missing 2 months already. He missed the Nisan and Iyar of that year are his father's. Okay. So Shlomo Melech, it says, started building the temple 4 years later, in the 4th year, which is basically 3 years later in Iyar. What was he waiting for? So it says, first of all, this is one diuk. He had told Shimi ben Gera, against whom he had a vendetta, I'm going to, really be watching you. You better not leave Jerusalem, or I'm going to kill you. And it took 3 years before that actually happened. Yoav ben Tzruya, he killed right away. Shimi ben Gera, he first killed his brother, because he realized his brother still had, plans to try to take the throne, like, Tachbulais. And he expelled Evyathar, the Kohen Gadol, who he realized was also conspiring against him. This is all right in there in the Psukim. And he had Yoav killed. Yoav realized, I'm next. And he tried to, run for cover, but it didn't work for him. And as for Shimon ben Gera, he didn't have any pretext to kill him, so he had to create a pretext. So he told him, you leave town, I'm going to kill you. Okay? I'm going to take an oath. But as long as he stayed in Jerusalem, he was safe. But it took him 3 years until he slipped up, and then he was able to kill him. And it says that Solomon contracted a marriage with Bath Paro. And that coincided with what? The building of the temple, according to the Chazal. Okay, the actual marriage, the consummation of the marriage was when he was supposed to inaugurate the temple. But the marriage was, he closed the deal on the marriage when he was ready to start building the temple. around the same time that Shimon ben Gera was killed, because they say he was sort of his Rebbe, and as long as his Rebbe was around, he wouldn't have done such a thing. But what's the meaning behind this? That Solomon married a daughter of Pharaoh at the time. By the way, her name isn't mentioned, and this particular Pharaoh's name isn't mentioned, but you could look in history books. You can estimate based on the time, considering that the next 40 years later, the Pharaoh's name is Shishak. So you look back in history, who was on the throne 40 years before that in Egyptian history. So Solomon, basically, why is he making a marriage with the Egyptians? Because the Jewish people until that point were considered what? As you find this, the Jewish people used to count their history from when? The Exodus. Matter of fact, that's what it says in the book of Kings. There's one event that's counted from when the Jews left Egypt, the actual building of the temple. It says 480 years after the Jewish people left Egypt, that's when Solomon finished building the temple. All the other dates in the book of Kings are dated to Kings or dated from some other point. But the fact that the Jewish people left Egypt, they were always considered as having left Egypt. Why? Because Egypt was the oppressor. Egypt was the superpower at the time, and Egypt was the classical oppressor of the Jewish people. So they had left Egypt, but they never left Egypt's shadow. They never became an empire, a rival. Okay, they were never in the same league as Egypt. The entire time they were in the land of Israel, they were just trying to control their own country and repel invaders. And eventually, they got overtaken by invaders. They were vassals of they were or subjects of the Philistines for a good century before King David actually came and finally did away with the Philistines as a legitimate threat. So Solomon marrying the daughter of Pharaoh was a way of saying we're finally there. Okay, the Jewish line, the beginning of the Jewish dynasty. He's the first time we've had a proper Jewish ruler who's inherited the throne from his father. Right? And he's the chosen one. He's actually anointed, chosen by God, anointed 3 times. And he is now taking over the female line of the former Egyptian oppressors. This is beginning a new era in Jewish history. And he gave another example, David and Abigail. What happened there? David took his enemy's former wife as his own wife. Okay? And then it says, by the way, the Navi promised that to David HaMelech. It says, it's a machlokas Tanaim, how to understand this. God, through the prophet Nathan, had told David, as part of your reward, I even gave the wives of your former master to you in your bosom. That's what he said. So, machlokas Tanaim, is it that David married daughters of Saul, which is actually the Pshat Pasuk? Michal bat Shaul was David's wife, right? That was the claim to the throne. Even if you say, well, he's not Saul's son, but where's Saul's sons? They're not around. So his son-in-law is the next in line. Or some say that indeed David HaMelech actually had concubines or whatever it may be, who had previously been Saul's. That's according to the opinion that says that Melech nosei almanato shel Melech. A king can actually marry the widow of a former king. The other opinion says no, a woman had a relationship of this nature with the king, then once he's dead, that's it. No one else. So it's a real risk. It's good to be one of the queens, but just to know if he's much older than you'll be a widow the rest of your life. Okay, so that seems to be the halacha there. Another example of this is what happened with Yehoram and Achav. The Davidic line, Yehoram was Yoshafat's son. His wife was a daughter of Achav. And that was the way they reunite the people. And the example that that Rav Sharki likes was Vashti and Achashverosh. According to Chazal, I don't know if there's much history books about this, but they say that Vashti was what? From Nebuchadnezzar's line, descended from Nebuchadnezzar through his grandson Belshazzar. And that's part of the legitimacy that Achashverosh, who was not the son of a king, okay? So the way he was able to grab legitimacy was a claim to a continuation of the Babylonian line, even though he was Persian. Okay. And history books say that Herod tried to do this with Miriam, the Chashmonai. Miriam Chashmonait. You heard of her, right? What did Chazal say about her? What did Josephus and the rest say about her? According to the let's say, Orthodox Jewish sources, he actually did marry her, and they had children. Except he eventually took those children out because he was paranoid. It's amazing. Who's Herod expecting to take over his kingdom if every time he had a legitimate heir, he would then have them killed for conspiracy? No, eventually he did. One of his children did take over. But the point is that Herod basically hated everybody. And they say that he even eventually had his wife executed, or brought about her death. Chazal say that no, they never actually got married, and she was never interested in him. She actually committed suicide when she realized she was the only Hesponian around, and he was actually planning to try to force her into a marriage in order to, feign some sort of actual legitimacy to the throne. So she killed herself. That's what in the declaration. Anybody who claims to be a Hashmona'i nowadays, a Hasmonian, since this happened, is just an Eved. Okay? It comes from it's not necessarily a slave to somebody, but from a line of converts. What happened was that either you could convert to Judaism straight up, or you could become an Eved to someone, like these Idumeans did, and then be emancipated and then become Jews. So that's what Herod's family was. Herod's father, Antipater, was apparently originally an Eved Kanani, who became emancipated, and that's how he was fully Jewish, technically speaking. Not meyuchas in any way, not qualified for the throne, but Jewish. Okay, and that continued through Agrippa. Agrippa's the first who was a kosher Jew. By kosher, I mean he kept the mitzvahs and he was excited about it, and the Chazal liked him. It doesn't mean he was kosher for the throne, but he was Jewish, and he had no yichus because he came from Gerim. Okay, so yeah, it's a shame that he had such a short reign. And it was a kind of a conflict, because you have someone who's doing right on the most basic level, on his Judaism level, and also running the country. He's doing things right, you'd hope, as a Jewish king, except he's totally not the right man for the job. So what should they have done? Yeah, in Malasot. But Rabbi Victor Miller pointed out, they flattered him. They said, Achicha, okay, achinu ata. Okay, he himself realized the problem that he had created, that he was living. Well, he could have found someone to replace him. He could have found, but either way, Rabbi Victor Miller says they should have just been quiet. They shouldn't have told him Achinuata. They should have just let him cry and realize it. Who are you to speak in front of the king? Don't tell him, oh, it's okay. Just be quiet. If they had just been quiet, that would have been perhaps better for them. You didn't have to say anything.